Türkiye ekonomisi kritik bir dönemeçten geçiyor. Hazine ve Maliye Bakanı Nurettin Nebati, Şubat ayının ikinci haftasında Londra'da yatırımcılarla, uluslararası yatırımcılarla bir araya geldi ve Türkiye'nin ekonomi programını, politikalarını ve gelecekteki planlarını anlattı. Nebati toplantının iyi geçtiğini söyledi. Bu toplantı üstüne çok yazıldı, çizildi ve bugün o toplantıya katılan isimlerden biri olan ekonomist, Blue Bay Asset Management'tan yatırım uzmanı Timoteus'tan konuşacağız. So, thanks for accepting our interview request, and I'd like to start by asking, even though you were heavily criticizing Ankara's economic policies for the past month, seems like you have a much more positive outlook after the meeting with Mr. Nebati and investors in London. So, I would like to ask, what caused this positive outlook? What changed this stance change?
Well, I'm not sure I've massively changed my view. I mean, I think the minister was very well prepared, and he made it clear, I think, that foreign investors are still welcome in Turkey. So, I mean, this was a charm offensive. I think there were concerns in the market, given some of the rhetoric out of Ankara in recent months, that, you know, Turkey wanted to solve its problems by itself, and that foreign investors weren't kind of welcome. And I think we got the opposite impression from the minister when he was in London. I mean, it was very much that, you know, it's not a war with the foreign speculators. You know, we appreciate foreign capital. We want foreign capital. We want to listen to you guys. You know, so encouraging, I think. So the fact that he came to London, he made the effort. He was very articulate. And that he sent a very strong message that foreigners are actually welcome in Turkey, which I think is really encouraging.
And as someone who was in the meeting, I'm going to quote the original Bloomberg story, that it was claimed that Minister Nebati said foreigners might struggle to understand the reason for high Turkish inflation due to cultural differences. And later, ministry here in Turkey denied that Minister Nebati had saying this way. So I was wondering, did he say something like this or no? And what was the confusion?
Look, there were a number of meetings. You know, he had a couple of group sessions with a large number of investors, and they had a number of one-on-ones with individual investors. I had an individual meeting with the minister, and he didn't really say that in my meeting, right? So I can't really comment on what was said in the larger meeting, but in my meeting with him, you know, I challenged him on the policy. And look, I think it's important to note that, you know, this was an encouraging meeting, but the challenges are still there. So, you know, I'm skeptical still about the ability of this new economic plan to kind of sustain in the face of very high inflation, a current account deficit that is still there, you know, continued pressure on the exchange rate. And a very difficult geopolitical backdrop, particularly with the threat of a Russia-Ukraine war, which will impact Turkey very badly in terms of tourism and energy. So, you know, I'm still a critique of central bank policy. I think real rates need to be much higher, or policy rates need to be much higher, I should say. And Turkey should not be running significantly negative rates. It's going to be very difficult to fight inflation with interest rates so low.
Right. So another thing I'd like to ask, from the meeting it was reported that, as you said, exchange rates, the pressure on the exchange rates are an important situation right now. And Mr. Nebati promised to investors that exchange rates will stay stable. Do you find this realistic?
Well, foreign reserve data is not that encouraging. You know, Turkey doesn't have a big buffer of foreign exchange reserves. We know the lira was stabilized in December and January by heavy FX intervention, both by the central bank and state banks. They can't do that for very long. They need to engineer a shift in confidence, right? I mean, locals need to buy into the story that the economic plan can work. Foreigners need to want to invest in Turkey again. Otherwise, I think it's going to be very difficult to get through to elections if they're in June 23. Rates this low. You know, I think it's going to be a real challenge. And as I said, the additional challenge is the geopolitical setting, which makes life very difficult for Turkey if in fact there's a conflict in a deepening of the conflict in Ukraine.
Fair. So let's cut back to a few weeks ago before the meeting. And as you went to the meeting in Ankara, what were some risk factors you saw about Turkish economy and some opportunities you saw?
You know, I've covered Turkey a long time, and you know, I'm criticised by both sides for my views. Right, and foreign investors want to invest in Turkey, right? They like many of the things about Turkey. You know, Turkey has some great banks, some great corporates, public finances are okay, decent shape. We want to invest, but at the moment, the big red flag is interest rates. And I think if you know, Turkey had a credible central bank with a credible monetary policy, I think foreigners would put a lot of money back into Turkey. So the opportunity is if, you know, conversations like I had with the minister and other investors had with the minister, you know, persuade the policy elite and the political leadership in Turkey that that there is a positive path for Turkey, and there is possible to reduce inflation with orthodox policy, with unfortunately higher interest rates in the short term, that you know, investors will reward policymakers for that, and we'll see Turkish assets perform very well. But again, with inflation at around 50% and interest rates at 14%, I don't think it adds up, right? I don't see how inflation can fall with such high negative real interest.
And after the meeting, how much of these concerns were answered? And did you feel as you left more confident about the situation of the economy? I
felt listened to. I hope the minister took our views on board and listened to the investors that he met and realised that there is concern about monetary policy and interest rate policy more generally, and about the sustainability of the policy mix at the moment. And I hope that when he went back to Ankara and Istanbul, that he had conversations with the powers that be in Turkey, and maybe there'll be some policy change. That's the hope anyway.
And in a recent interview with Nikkei, Mr. Nebati said that they're going to stay on road with this monetary policy and they're not going to change their own. I know that you're a vocal critic of this unorthodox policy. And so looking ahead, do you think it is realistic that this policy plan can run its course, or do you think there will be a U-turn?
You know, we had a British Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, who was asked about the most challenging thing in politics, and his reply was events, my dear boy, events. And you know, Erdogan historically has been pretty pragmatic, right? And you could argue that maybe that was the people around him. You know, he had a very good set of policy officials, you know, Akbal, Babajan, Şimşek, you know, Abdullah Gül, all these people that moderated his views. The concern, obviously, is that now Erdogan is only in charge of interest rate policy, and he's strong on it. But I think if we do see that conflict in Ukraine, I think Turkey will have to change policy because there will be, you know, Turkey will suffer because of higher energy prices and the loss of tourism revenues. And I think the current mix is kind of buying time until the tourism season comes back in April, May, or maybe May, June, and the hope that begins to ease pressure on the current accounts. Unfortunately, if we see a conflict in the next month in Ukraine, you know, Russian tourists will not be coming to Turkey. Tourists probably won't be coming to Turkey. So that's going to be a big hit to the current account. So probably we'll see a lot of pressure on the exchange rate. And then the central bank will, I think, have to make the very difficult decision that it needs higher policy rates.
Fair. And what do you make of the new FX-protected lira deposit practice? What do you think of it?
Look, one of the positives about Turkey has some very innovative bankers and some very innovative policymakers. You remember the credit guarantee scheme that was criticised initially when it's launched. It proved pretty successful. Maybe it was too successful in terms of it stimulated too much credit and macro imbalances. And again, I think this FX-linked deposit scheme is very innovative. At the margin, it buys time, but I think it doesn't solve the underlying fundamental problem, which is interest rates are too low. And on its own, I don't think it can solve the problem. It could delay the need for higher rates and maybe the need for a weaker currency again for maybe a couple of months, but I don't think it fundamentally is a substitute for good policy from the central bank.
When we look back, we know these kind of meetings, like the meeting in London, it's being made with the goal of bringing back foreign investors to Turkey. But if you look from the grander scope, is it possible that foreign investors would return to Turkey en masse during this administration with AKP in power? Is it a possibility? What can bring them back?
Look, I think it's fair to say that the last few years have been very painful for investors. Many people have lost a lot of money, been optimistic about Turkey and been invested in Turkish assets. And I guess those people are now very cautious. You remember back when Minister Akbal was appointed central bank governor, people thought that was a turning point and they put a lot of money back into Turkey. And then he was fired and then they lost a lot of money. So confidence is pretty low. And this government, I think, need to work very hard to re-establish confidence of foreign investors. It's not impossible. I think we need to think back. AKP has ruled Turkey for 20 years. The first 10 years were incredibly successful. The economy did very well in that first decade. The second decade has been less successful. The hope that is somehow that Turkey can go back to settings in the first 10 years. Remember that Turkey ended up with investment grade at the end of that decade, and now unfortunately it's been downgraded significantly. So look, investors are also pragmatic and they want opportunities, but it's very difficult to invest in Turkey at the moment with such high negative real interest rates, such high inflation. And also remember, we're going to elections, which, elections within the next year to 18 months, 15 months. And that elections are also an uncertainty.
And so I'll come back to the elections, but to follow that up with, what happens if a government change happens in the election? Would opposition garner more trust? If opposition becomes the government, would they garner more trust in foreign investors? To quote Mr. Ali Babacan, who's the leader of the Deva Party, he said the situation would change in a week after the opposition is elected. Is this realistic? Would that be a major change that quickly?
Investors want good policy. So whichever government will deliver good policy, I think will be rewarded with foreign investors putting money back into Turkey. Minister Babacan was an extremely good Minister of the Treasury. Also, he was foreign minister, as you'll remember. There's a lot of trust by foreign investors in Minister Babacan. And I think there is confidence that if Minister Babacan returned to government in some way, that I think we're inflows. I think he has, a lot of backing, a lot of support, I would say, from both the domestic and the foreign investor community, I think. So, but it depends on, I think it will depend on the shape of the government. Again, it's about policy. I think the messaging from Minister Babacan and the likely alliance, which could take power after the elections, is that we will see a return to policy, the successful policy that we saw in the first 10 years of AKP rule.
And I know I don't need to explain the situation to you in Turkey, as you follow Turkey very well, but it seems like snap elections is a possibility, that we might have an election much sooner, before June 2023. And we know that Turkish market is already really volatile. So would this snap election cause more volatility?
I don't think the current economic policy settings can keep the lira stable through to June 23. So I think it seems very likely and that Erdogan will go early. If we see a period of stability on the exchange rate and if he sees his opinion polls looking slightly better, I think possibly September, October might be a window for him to go to the elections early. I think the market will be focusing on the opinion polls. It will be focused on messaging around, is this going to be a disputed election? Is it going to be a smooth election campaign? If Erdogan loses, will he transfer power easily? The market, it wants a peaceful election. It wants a democratic election. Again, it wants whoever emerges to implement good economic policy. I think, as I said, the current economic policy settings, the negative real interest rates are very damaging. They have been a major driver for high inflation. And I think generally the market wants to see a change certainly a change of monetary policy.
I want to ask for another article that was run by Financial Times past week, that it was focusing on the situation of Turkish economy and talking about how Turkey managed to escape from a market crash as a miracle. So that's the main point anyway. So I'd like to ask that, do you think sustainability of Turkish economy right now, even though it's definitely not in a great shape, do you think it's a miracle?
Well, not really. Look, the currency went to 1830 in December. But look. Even 1350 on the exchange rate is a massively depreciated currency. So it's very difficult to see it has been a miracle or a success that the currency is stabilized at such a weak level. There has to be a flaw for the currency, and maybe this is it. But I think the challenge, certainly for Minister Nebati and the central bank, is, the currency might be cheap, right? And it may mean that the current account adjusts or continues to adjust, I should say. But with inflation at 50%, the competitiveness of the lira, even at 1350, will erode very quickly. If it stays at 1350 in a year's time, it will have appreciated by about 50% or so. I don't know. So the danger is it needs a continued devaluation to remain competitive and to keep pace with inflation. So inflation's the central thing here, and the government needs to work, and the central bank needs to work much harder in fighting inflation. So no, in answer to your question, no, I don't think it's a miracle. Unfortunately, it was bad policies that resulted in the devaluation last year. We saw intervention in December, significant sale of FX reserves to hold the currency, and now we're in wait and see mode. We want to see better policy, and ultimately that will determine whether or not things are sustainable and there's light at the end of the tunnel.
And to conclude this interview with, I would like to ask you about Mr. Nebati again. I know you have extensive knowledge about many Minister of Treasuries in Turkey, and lately, we had a few quick changes, and Mr. Nebati has made some quick, made his mark known. He talked about, understanding it from investors' eyes, and he made this, in this interview, he said that they don't really know how they stabilize the market, the FX situation, and also that he has been, really going under the burden of explaining this new policies to public. And you have met with him personally in London. So I would like to ask you about your observations about him.
Look, it's the first time I've met the minister. Obviously, I've read and heard lots of things before the meeting. Obviously, there's been a lot of criticism of some of his meetings in Turkey. I can only say, my honest opinion about what I saw and what I heard, and I thought he came across, relatively well. I've had meetings with lots of ministers in lots of different countries, and many meetings with various Turkish finance and treasury officials in my time, and some of those latter meetings were pretty poor, I have to say. This one, it came across, relatively well, I thought. So, again, he was well prepared, he was articulate, he listened. I'm not saying that I agree with the policy mix. In fact, I don't agree with the policy mix. I think that, as I said, monetary policy is not appropriate. But it was encouraging that he was willing to debate it. We had a debate about it. People have different views. My views are, I've been very open in terms of what you mentioned. I've been very critical about monetary policy in Turkey in the past, and I still am. I haven't changed my view. But as I said before, I was encouraged by the fact that he was friendly, he was open, communicated well with investors, or certainly with myself. But I'm still not convinced in terms of the economic policy mix.
Okay, thank you so much for answering our questions, Mr. Resch. It was great to have you here.
My pleasure.
And have a nice day.